Hello and welcome to the lecture of International Business Environment. Now in today's lecture we will going to have a discussion on Block 3, Unit 9. In Block 3 we will basically discussing about the world trading system and institutions. That means from now or for in this block onwards we will going to have overall discussions about what is world trading system is, what are those parties who involve in world trading, how they actually bring out all the procedures and practices of world trading, what are the institutes which are working in world trading. So we will going to have a discussions about world tradings. Now the unit 9 is specifically discussing about the world trade. What is exactly a world trade? And topics to be covered are introduction, overview of world trade, trade in service, export basket of developing countries, problems in developing countries. Now in this unit we will basically discussing about the world trade, what specifically the world trade is, what are all attempt was taken by a government when they performed in the world trade growth, when they were actually work on that world trade growth. What kind of concepts in the government are working when they are actually having the practices or trading of exports and import. When we discuss कि एक जब country decide करती है कि yes वो world trade में आएगी या world trade के अंदर अपनी participation देंगी, तो ये इस सब पूरे ब्लॉक के अंदर हम ये डिस्कस करने वाले हैं कि yes किस तरह से क्या फैक्टर्स हैं जो गवर्नमेंट ध्यान में रखते हैं, डेवलपिंग नेशंस किस तरह से परफॉर्म करते हैं, क्या प्रैक्टिसेस उन्हें ध्यान में रखनी होती हैं, एंड यस एट द सेम टाइम व्हाई टू अटेन द पॉलिसी फॉर्मुलेटेड बाय गवर्नमेंट, व्हाट आर दोज पॉलिसीज जो कि फॉलो की जाएगी और वो पॉलिसीज जो गवर्नमेंट ने बनाई है. एट द सेम टाइम in this unit we will going to have an understanding of commodity structures and country composition की एक पर्टिकुलर कंट्री ग्लोबल लेवल पर कितना कंट्रीब्यूट कर रही है, किस तरह से परफॉर्म कर रहे हैं. सो इन सब की डिस्कशन वी विल बेसिकली हैविंग इन दिस सेशन. Specifically, this was working on the problem faced by a developing country. We were mainly emphasizing that when it comes to the performance in the world trade, so developing countries, yes, may face many challenges, many problems. So, किस तरह की problems एक developing country को face करनी पड़ती हैं, कैसे, yes, at the same time, what are their roles and importance in a particular world trade. Now, if we talk about world trade basically is what? That is what the transferring of merchandises into different countries. और हम जब एक merchandise के basis पर जब trade करते हैं, so that comes into world trade. We come to know that yes, to have a one practice in a whole world as in a trade, that was comes into world trade. So world merchandise trade has been constantly growing at a rate higher than the rate of a growth in the global output in the 90s. If we talk about 19th century, because it's an overview, हम एक वर्ल्ड ट्रेड का ओवरव्यू देख रहे हैं, तो यस हम लोग 19th सेंचुरी से डिस्कशंस करेंगे. तो 19th सेंचुरीज में यस द ग्रोइंग रेट इज वेरी मच कांस्टेंट रादर देन हम ये कह सकते हैं कि आउटपुट इज वेरी हाई. आउटपुट बहुत ज्यादा था जबकि प्रोडक्ट की डिमांड इज वेरी समवेयर द कांस्टेंट. एंड यस एट द सेम टाइम द वर्ल्ड मर्केंडाइजिंग ट्रेड इज बेसिकली स्टार्ट ग्रोइंग by 1919 and 95. तब एक ऐसा टाइम पीरियड था जहां पर एक मैक्सिमम ग्रोथ उन्होंने not exactly maximum but yes they start grew. In that case yes 6% of growth was there. And if we talk about in 1998 they basically have 3.5. So that is what the another extension of 3.5. That is what the period in which there was the experience of a slowdown, क्योंकि एक stagnant period था, क्योंकि 1997 में there was a growth of 10.5%. So this is what the up and downs of world trade. एक world trade में जब भी एक country perform करती है तो certain up and downs आते हैं. That means hype of maximum demands of that particular product, or there may be a slowdown of that particular product. Now if we talk about today's scenario in 21st century, yes, now the dealing of a world trade is not limited to the merchandises. Now it's actually entered into the service industry also. अब इंटेंजिबिलिटी फैक्टर्स में भी इंटरनेशनल बिजनेसेस और इंटरनेशनल प्रैक्टिसेस आ गए हैं. There are regulatory bodies, there are many regulations जो कि बेसिकली सर्विसेज में काम कर रहे हैं, जो सर्विसेज से रिलेटेड वर्किंग को परफॉर्म करते हैं. So they also basically pose an accurate transparency issue. एक 21st century का एक सबसे बड़ा इशू ये भी है कि yes, there must be a transparency in the trade. There is no such corruptions or fraud from different countries. तो उस चीज को मिनिमाइज करते हुए एक क्लीन एक ट्रांसपेरेंसी ट्रेड की डिमांड है अब 21st century में. Because yes, the practices are increased, the participation are increased in the world trade, because yes, it's a one source to get more advantages in the economy. Now if we talk about the world trade, so there are the leaders who perform in the world trade जो कि बहुत बेटरली इस वर्ल्ड ट्रेड में परफॉर्म कर रहे हैं in 21st century. There are 5 main leaders जो इसमें परफॉर्म कर रहे हैं. The very first is Canada, China, Mexico, Japan, German. These all are the countries जो कि 5 top largest trading countries में से आते हैं. And yes, जिनके जो products हैं, that product was worldwide adopted. When we talk about the world trade, so yes, in the trading, the size of economy is again the concept कि size of economy जो है वो सबसे ज्यादा डिपेंड करता है कि एक कंट्री जो है किस तरीके की एक्सपोर्ट एंड इम्पोर्ट्स में आ रही है. The maximum the export is, so automatically there was a maximum sales and demand from the outer market, जिसके थ्रू एक ये जो हम लोग 5 largest trading countries की बात कर रहे हैं. The one of the main reason is that they are able to get in a more export of their products, and yes, the minimum import. So in that case, they were able to manage their world trade and they were able to manage their practices. Which basically that management basically lead to yes a proper selling and yes a proper income generation for all these largest trading partners. Now the next concept is now the service trade in service, जो कि हम अभी पिछली स्लाइड में भी डिस्कस कर रहे थे कि 21st century में सिर्फ एक मर्केंडाइजिंग डीलिंग ही नहीं वर्ल्ड ट्रेड में आई. नाउ दे आर एक्चुअली एंटर्ड इनटू द सर्विस आल्सो. They basically comes into the international trades and services. Now if we talk about services basically deals with all that intangible factors. Now they have to be calculated and more value oriented concept. So in that case, the world or international trade required to generate the values now. They have to deal with the accurate estimates of values. Just by getting the idea of a value, then only they can come into the particular business. Now value estimation is one of an again critical task for all these organizations. Service dealing improved in the international trade. This service improvement leads to more value trade. They are leads to the valuations in trade practices. And now calculating of a value is again a very difficult concept. Now if it comes to defining a value, जब हम ये बात करते हैं कि सर्विस हमारी वैल्यू से डिफाइन होती है तो वैल्यू कैसे कैलकुलेट होगी. So the very first is commercial service. That means what kind of service in you. Basically एक जो कंट्री है वो किस तरह की सर्विसेज को प्रोवाइड कर रही है, कितना ज्यादा कमर्शलाइज है उसकी प्रैक्टिसेस. So that comes into the commercial services. Second category is what comes into investment income, कि कितना ज्यादा इन्वेस्ट किया गया है उस सर्विस को परफॉर्म करने के लिए. So that comes into investment income. The another one is government service. Now what are those government services which are basically regulated? So these are all services which are regulated by government. So that comes into international trades and service. Now the trade in service is basically increased rapidly, and this share of the service basically help a company to have a very good GDP of many industries and countries to be increased. And ये एक कंट्री की GDP इंक्रीज करने में बहुत हेल्प करते हैं. एंड यस एट द सेम टाइम नाउअडेज हर कंट्री के अंदर सर्विस का एक अच्छा कंट्रीब्यूशन है उनके ट्रेड्स के. Now export basket of developing country. This slide is basically showing us that yes, who are those companies which are basically performing into the the export of primary commodities. If we talk about the Asian countries, yes, Asian countries have a good contribution in the sharing or exporting the primary commodity, while yes, the Latin America, the Africas, Asian, European countries, they are mainly working in the primary commodities, and they basically help, or that export of primary commodity help them to earn a foreign exchange in a better way. Now, what are those problems which are basically taken by the developing countries? If we discuss about the problems, the very first problem is demand elasticity. Yes, the changes in the demand. Demand elasticity is one of the factors which affect the developing countries. If demand is high or low, they affects the export of and import of that particular product. So if we talk about the demand is what basically the requirements or the needs arises in the particular market. So that is basically n numbers of a factor which affects the demand and leads to the demand elasticity. For example, the price of a product is affected the demand, or the income of a consumer affects the demand of that particular product. If XYZ company is dealing with the, suppose for example, dealing with the food stuff, or they were mainly exporting the tea or a coffee product, so in that case, if the income increases, so probably the consumption will be the same for that kind of product, because they were low income products. So that is what the effect of demand elasticity was there. So developed countries may face these kind of issues. The second problem is what? The competition from the substitute. Yes, the substitution effect. That means there are a number of substitutes for the one product. Like we will taking the example of a tea and the coffee in the demand elasticity. So now they are the two main substitutes. Now if the demand of a tea arises, so automatically they may lead to the competition for the coffee industry also, for that exporting. So that will lead to the again an effect of developing country. If one developing country is good in the production of a coffee, so automatically the another country who is good in the production of a tea, that may lead to the another competition for that and affect the export of that particular country. Now the technological development. This is the problem in which the maybe like the developing countries are not as good in the technology, so they may affect the production of that particular product, or they may they don't have as much qualitative product to serve the international market, so that will lead to the technological development. So that is what कि maybe शायद उस particular developing country की जो technology है उसकी वजह से वो as demanded by the international market उतना qualitative product ना बना पाए, so that may affect their exports. Then another is growth of service sector. Yes, as service sector was growing, so again it is what the dealing in the intangibility, that will rise the another difficulty level for the developing countries, because again the valuation and estimation concept. Now value, अगर हम service industry की बात करते हैं, तो it is mainly dependent on the one major source, that is human resource. So in developing country, human resource is very easily available. So in that case, they may offer a very minimum value for their high quality of product, so they may affect that kind of a thing. So that will lead to the growth of service sectors. Then inelasticity of supply, probably the developing countries not able to provide the efficient supply, or not able to fulfill the demand in the expo or other countries. So that comes into the inelasticities of supply. This is another issue. A problem in developing countries basically happens in the world trade. These are, ये सब वो issues हैं जो world trade में arise होते हैं developing countries के लिए. So the very first is price fluctuation. And then another price fluctuation is basically discussing about the fluctuations in, again, if there was in a high demand elasticity, so automatically they may affected by the price. So that price fluctuation may affect the production, and then again the affects the market demand. So automatically एक price fluctuation वहाँ से arise हो जाएगा, जो एक problem rise कर सकता है developing countries के लिए. So now another is protectionism. Protectionism is basically when there was a protectionism for the developing countries. Yes, there are a number of practices which is performed by the developing country to increase their export. they have to put a lot on effort for improve it. At the same time, there are certain regulations of the developed country who put certain kind of restrictions, or we can say that who limitize the export earnings of developing country. That comes into the protectionism part. So protectionisms can be performed by the government itself, or for minimizing the effects of substitution, minimizing the effect of new entrances of that in the particular market. So protectionism is one technique which is used in the world trade, which affects the developing country. So there are a number of protectionisms was happened. So the very first is subsidies. Subsidies are basically the extra value which is given by the government of that particular country to increase their export. So subsidy may give them protection to have a good production, have a good export. Another is tariffs and non-tariff barriers. It's again a kind of restrictions which is put on the world trade. So this restriction was basically lead to effects again the export of that particular developing country. So that comes into tariffs and non-tariff. Tariffs again comes into all the cost barriers which is may rise by the government, or non-tariff is all quantitative barriers which may given by the government to that particular country. So that comes into tariff and non-tariff barriers. Another is managed trade, is to manage the or balancing your trade. Like to first हर एक कंट्री की प्रायोरिटी होती है कि वो सबसे पहले अपने आप को सेल्फ सफिशिएंट करेंगे एक प्रोडक्ट के लिए, देन दे विल गोइंग टू एक्सपोर्ट इट. सो इन दैट केस दिस मैनेजमेंट may lead to affect the proper export functioning. So that's comes into managed trade. Another is non-trade issues. There are other non-trade issues which is maybe the human rights was there, human issues was there, so social issues was there, and other cultural issues were there. So ये भी कुछ issues होते हैं जो developing countries को world trade में grow करने से रोकते हैं, and yes they may lead to affect that trades of that particular country. Then MNC influences are there. MNC influences, the impacts of MNCs probably they affect their whole trading. Then terms of trade is another effect. That is what the major practice in which there was the trades, the in rules and regulation in which the company going to be performed, that comes into the terms of a trade. जिस भी रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशन में एक पर्टिकुलर कंपनी परफॉर्म करेगी वर्ल्ड ट्रेड के अंदर, तो ऑटोमेटिकली वो कहीं ना कहीं उन्हें कंट्रोल और रिस्ट्रिक्ट भी करेंगे. सो उस कंट्रोल और उस रिस्ट्रिक्शन में हो सकता है कि वो एक पर्टिकुलर कंपनी जो है वर्ल्ड ट्रेड में ना परफॉर्म कर पाए. सो इन दैट केस दैट विल लीड्स टू द टर्म ऑफ इन अ ट्रेड. So this is basically comes in the today's session. So this is all about for this session. So thank you so much. IGNOU Books.